And Australia shakes up its military to adapt to China's growing military clout in the Asia-Pacific. The restructure features new long-range strike capacity and the redeployment of hundreds of troops in the northern regions.
And for more on the arms race in the Asia-Pacific, we're joined by Colonel Grant Newsham. He's a senior research fellow from the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies and joins us live from Tokyo. Colonel Newsham, let's start with Australia. The biggest restructure of the Australian army in 12 years. But you do not see it that way. You think the government does not even have the focus it has on overhauling defence from even just 6 months ago.
Well, it does seem as though the Labour government is losing interest in the defence reshaping. They don't seem to be funding it the way they should, but really it's a question of priority. And there's almost a sense that there's no hurry. And there was a lot of optimism a couple of years ago when AUKUS, there's a deal for the submarines with the Americans and the British, was formed. But it just doesn't seem like it's moving. As I said, like it's a priority. Everything's taking so long. And it's always a little more study before we do this. So they've did some good things on paper 6 months ago, a little longer. But bringing it to fruition seems to take an awfully long time. Sometimes you get the impression the Australians can't exactly decide what kind of military they want.
Well, what kind of military should they want? Should they really want to overhaul their defence system, according to you?
Well, you want one that can address the Chinese threat. And that means you're able to project power well beyond Australia, way up north. And you also want a military that is small, that is mobile, has a combined arms capability. It means you can combine air, sea, and ground resources into a coherent package. And it has to be able to be more than just an adjunct to whatever the Americans are doing. So Australia needs to be able to defend itself as much as it possibly can. And that requires a real reshaping of the military. As I say, there's a lot of good intention. There was a good review of the defense requirements that was put out a few months ago. But I say bringing it to fruition, it's just taking a lot longer than it should. There's a lot of good intention here and there, but you do get the impression the Labour government is not prioritizing the way it was. There's almost a sense, well, we've gotten over our troubles with China. We're going to be talking again. We're going to do business with them. And maybe defense gets pushed to the side.
Colonel Newsham, let's bring in another territory that's making the news today, of course, Taiwan and its first of 8 submarines. Now, given the strength of partners, and most of Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, not so much Taiwan, but partnering the US in terms of military defense, given the strength of the US military, it's unlikely that any country, any territory can hope to be anything more than an adjunct to the US military power. How can we expect that of any country, Japan and Australia, that they actually are able to do so?
Well, you do need American backing at the end of the day, just given the realities of the Chinese military power. But if a country gets its military house in order and turns itself into a force, a military that can really reach out and hurt an enemy, just a very tough nut to crack, then that is going to cause an adversary a pause. But it's also going to make the Americans more willing to get in and help. And that's an important part of the equation, which is often overlooked, that there is a sense sometimes in Washington that countries are depending too much on the Americans. So when a country does what's necessary, spends the money, takes the political risks to beef up its own military and actually to make it so it can fight, you actually increase the possibility of the Americans, but also other regional nations helping you. And by that, I mean Japan, Australia in particular. You have to be careful not to just say, well, they're just an adjunct to the Americans. Every country in Asia, every free country has its own ability to operate and to make its own decisions, but they do require the United States, and that's just the reality of things. And it's a good thing when free nations get together and cooperate and contribute as they can.
And final question here. I should have picked up on this more clearly on the Taiwan submarines. The fact that only 40% of this latest submarine is home built. It requires 60% of contributions from other from countries contributing expertise, contributing parts, and likely with say-so from the United States as far as Taiwan is concerned. Is this a good example of how if a country, if a territory should step up, they will get support, not just from the United States, but from US allies?
Oh, very much. And I think it is significant that so many other countries did agree to help the Taiwanese build up their submarine program. And that tells you a lot in terms of political support, actual or potential, that Taiwan has. So when Taiwan spends the money and does what's necessary to build these submarines, there's a political, psychological effect that is immense. And the fact that only 40% or so is homegrown, well, that's often the case with a lot of weapon systems. But it's more the fact that countries are willing to help Taiwan that is the important thing, despite knowing that Beijing is going to scream bloody murder, as they do with everything.
Oh, thanks so much. Colonel Grant Newsham speaking to us live there from Tokyo.